And Josh, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. It's a small crowd. That's all right. I don't mind a small crowd. In fact, I saw some of the other sessions that are going on right now, and I wondered, man, I kind of want to be in them too. So I'm glad we're recording all these so I can go check out all the things that are happening right now. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you today. And I'm just going to jump right in. I will tell you, this is kind of the first time I've done, I do a lot of, quite a bit of presenting but this is my first go around with this particular one. So please I do encourage feedback both during the session and after. I'd love to hear everything. One of the things I thought about as I got started with this today is actually I was preparing and I thought, man, I did a terrible job of giving a title to this presentation because I think, most people are going to think, oh, this is totally about the Malcolm Gladwell book, right? Which is phenomenal, by the way. It's a, but the title is not really very informative. It kind of gives the impression that we're going to be summarizing this amazing book from Malcolm Gladwell, and that's not really my intention today to do that. Because while the name and the overall effect are going to kind of be similar to the Gladwell book, I want to instead really share some insights that I've gained from a tipping point that I experienced on my own here at CTO and that we experienced at Colorado Tech, where I'm on the faculty in the communication program specifically. And we kind of hit a tipping point a few years ago. And so, so this is going to be more about general tipping points and what we've learned from that and what I hope to have some lessons that can share from that. Not specifically about the book, but the book is a good read. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to. But again, as we jump into this, please do feel free to jump in at any time with questions, either in the chat pod. I'll keep an eye on the chat, or just using your microphone or whatever. You're not going to bother me at all just by jumping in and asking questions or making comments. The TLDR version, or as my kids would say, right, which is now, I guess, it stands for too long didn't read. They tell me that all the time because I tend to be a little wordy. What do you expect from a communication scholar, right? But I tend to be a little wordy, so they tell me, no, it was too long. I didn't read that one. So this is the TLDR version, the too long didn't read version of what happened for us at CTU. So in short, we noticed a decline in the performance of our primary communication course, our biggest communication course, which is interpersonal communication. It's a standard interpersonal course. And it's part of the general education curriculum at CTU, and we just generally noticed a dip in the completion percentages, and it wasn't just like a one session dip. And we go every 5 weeks. We have 5 week sessions. But we noticed there was kind of a consistent, lower number of people completing the class. Not really staggeringly low, but lower than we wanted. And so there were a variety of factors involved, as we discovered, some of those included things like changes in course tracks. So for example, we were seeing students all of a sudden much earlier in their college career. And we have a lot of first generation college students. So we had a lot of students more than before that had never been in a college course, and so we were managing that. So we had changing student populations as well, and some personnel changes and just some curriculum updates that had happened and others that needed to happen. So there were, as always, there are a confluence of events that go into these things, right? A confluence of factors that happen. And so there were a lot of things going on. But we did engage in a kind of a focused course improvement plan, we call it, or a curriculum improvement plan, where we worked to develop strategies for improving our course completion rate. And that was our specific goal as part of this process. We wanted to increase our course completion rate, meaning essentially students who were getting a C or better in the class and able to move on then from the class. So we wanted to really increase the course completion rate. So without sharing any proprietary information or whatever, I do want to share just a couple of graphs. Now I will say these are, and especially since I don't one of my math colleagues is here today, so I want to be very clear that this is not to scale. For example, this is not a 0 to 100 chart, but just to give you an impression, a visual representation of where we were at. So this is kind of the course completion percentage, without numbers or anything, but you can get the idea of where we were at back all the way in August of 2021. We've been tracking this for a long time, and you see there was, one session in particular was really low, but in general was lower than we wanted. But then in April of 2022, when we started this program and started doing, and this has been a variety of things that have happened since then, but now you can see we've been consistently higher. And so just to give you an idea of, again, well, since this is not to scale where we were at, I'll tell you there were three numbers that I was looking for in terms of completion percentage. there was the number like that was kind of the metric for what the university would like to see as completion percentage, with kind of what their standard was. And then there was what I expected because I knew we could do this, which was about, 5% higher than the university standard. So it was a little higher than the university standard. And then there was like my dream goal. And I thought, man, if we can get to this number, that would be just phenomenal. Even to get there for one session would be amazing. So then I'm going to show you this chart again, but I'm going to add these three lines. And so the lowest one is the university expectation. The middle one is kind of my expectation. And then the top one would be, again, my dream goal. If we could hit that number, it would be, I'd just be astounded. And you could see we've not only hit that goal, we've exceeded that goal, my dream goal, consistently for the last basically 3 years almost. 2.5, 3 years we've been above that what I would have considered a dream goal at that time. And so we've seen significant improvement and consistent, sustained improvement. Right? That's key to me as well. And I will also tell you that during this time, one of our main assignments in the course is a discussion board, not unusual for online courses, right? And so some people would say, well, this is just because, you softened up on your grading and, that kind of thing to push those numbers up. And I will tell you, actually, in fact, during this time, the average discussion board grade has gone down, not up. So grades have not increased, they've gone down. And part of that is because we're pulling students up, basically. Students that were getting, D's and F's in the class are now getting C's and B's. They're not all getting straight A's, but they're completing the course successfully, right? And they're increasing their learning. And so those numbers kind of pulled the discussion board down because most of them are not getting, 100% or whatever, really, really high grades on the discussion boards. They're getting, middle of the road grades, but they're learning and they're succeeding in the course. They're completing the course. So it's I've been really thrilled and I can report that it's not grade inflation at all. In fact, if anything, we've tightened up and we have done several over this time, done several as a group of comm faculty, and there are about 40 comm faculty that teach at CTU. There are about 40 of us. And but we have done several kind of grade standardization efforts where we just get together and say, okay, make sure we're on the same page with grading and things. So anyway, all that to say, this is not grade inflation. This is hard work of faculty and us putting in this improvement plan and hitting that tipping point. That April 2022 area, when we really instituted this focus plan of that I'm going to try and explain as we go through this a little bit, is our tipping point of this got us over the hump and really has allowed us to see that sustained success and it has a ripple effect, of course, throughout the rest. Our faculty cohort has had extremely low turnover, for example, which I can tell you, having been in higher ed for 20 years now, most of that at a community college, turnover is real, right? I mean, you see a lot of people come and go. They don't stick around. But our faculty cohort has been really consistent. Has been we've had a really stable. Again, we have about 40 faculty members, and I would say our turnover rate has been way less than 10% over the last 5 years. When we've lost maybe 4 or 5 faculty over the last 5, and most of those have been people who found a full-time job and don't have the time to put into this as an adjunct anymore or whatever. So it's all been on good experiences. Anyway, okay. I have a tendency to get off track, which is why I don't mind if people interrupt me because I'm off track all the time anyway. So, but all this to say, this has all been really positive success. I could not be more pleased with the way we've come about this. We really hit that tipping point and have found a way to sustain the success and meaningful completion for students during that time. So okay, so what are we going to do today? We're going to I want to just talk about how you can identify your tipping point, how it worked for us, how we can identify our tipping point, how then we can identify the obstacles that are keeping us from, getting over that hill onto the other side, and then what we can do to take action once we've done those things, how we can really put this plan into motion, at least again, how this worked for us and has worked for us over the last 5 years. Uh, okay, so what can we do to identify our tipping point? Meaning, what is that thing? What is that one place? Or if there, again, nothing's ever one thing, but what can we do to get over the hump for whatever specific problem that we have? So one thing I really want to encourage you to do is dive into data. And again, I'm so grateful my math colleague is here today, and I don't think she'll be surprised when I say this. I'm not a numbers person. I'm not a math person. I really appreciate math, but it's just never been my thing. And I'm not really a quantitative person either. I'm not a data-driven person. But I will say, over the course of this project, I've become very much a data person. CTU has an amazing set of dashboards, and we do an incredible job of gathering data and having data available. And I've really learned through the with the help of my colleagues how to use those and how to really find the data and pull the data that I need. But it's important, if you're going to identify your tipping point, that you get into that data. So for example, when we were experiencing that dip, one of the things we did in the course improvement plan is really dive into data. And the program director that I was working with really pushed me to do that, and gave me specific areas to look at, because again, that's not my strong suit necessarily naturally, but it was a really critical aspect of identifying, what was going on here? Why were we seeing this dip? And specifically, what was it? And for us, it was, looking at things like, okay, um, where are students dropping off? Where are we losing students, for example? Where in we're a 5 week session. So where in those 5 weeks are we losing students? Are they disappearing? Right. And we were able to do that through looking at the data, and not only, looking at week to week, but looking at, okay, what assignments are really throwing students off? Where do we see a sharp drop in the amount of student participation in a specific assignment? That type of information was really critical in developing this plan and getting really granular, getting really into the details. So to identify your tipping point, you've got to really lean into the data. You've got to find a way to gather that. And maybe your institution has it. If not, then you've got to find a way to do it yourself. But you've really got to find a way to, and not just guess about things, but really have something that gives you some direction through the data that you can gather. Having said that, I also want you to trust your gut. Okay. Data is important. Data is, as I just said, I can't say enough about how important the data was, but at the same time, you have what you need to find the stuff too. So you've got to depend on your gut a little bit, and not just entirely on your gut, but specifically your experience, your expertise, and your intuition through all of this. Right? Over time, and your own instructional experience, your own administrative experience in higher ed, you've gathered this kind of experience. So you have the knowledge that you may need to lead you someplace, and you have that expertise both in your content area, but also in the area in which you work. From that experience, you've gained that expertise. And so then you have to lean into your intuition and trust yourself a little bit, right? Trust your gut to know where to lead you. So that when you see that information that the data is providing, then you can use your gut then to kind of guide you along with that. So it's the combination of things, right? It's you have to look quantitatively, but at the same time, you have to lean into your own experiences and your own expertise, and just trust yourself to identify and notice these things, and say, this is what's really going to be important here. The last part that was really important for me is to bring in some fresh eyes. It's really difficult to see problems sometimes when you're right in the midst of it, or really to identify things, when you're a little too close to things. So it was really helpful for me to bring in, again, a program director that was able to work with me through that and point out some things that I wouldn't have noticed. And we have some incredible colleagues at CTU. I can't say enough about how awesome our gen ed team is at CTU, and people with different skills and experiences and backgrounds. And also then really key component is that I always tell people, I've never had anybody in our team tell me no when I ask them about something or for something, or ask them for help with something. Nobody's even hesitated, and they just immediately say yes and jump in. So bringing in some fresh eyes and other people who can give you some honest feedback and some informed feedback, and help you identify those things and say, this is what's really important. And the one that we found for us, as we'll discuss here, for the comms program, it was pretty specific. It was a specific not just a specific discussion board. It was our Unit 2 discussion board, but not only that, it was then on time submission of our Unit 2 discussion boards, which is, again, fairly specific, something to look at. But since that time, that's a number that I have tracked religiously, week in and week out. I'm examining that, every session, the Unit 2 on-time discussion board submissions, because that is really indicative of, I can almost predict what our completion percentage is going to be as a result of that. As we're going to discuss, that has become really important for us. So, and become something that we have geared up toward to improve that. So, but I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have thought to get that specific or really look at something like that that was specifically a suggestion that came from the program director I was working with that really, led me to that. So bringing in some fresh eyes, you got to identify these things, but it's good to have some outside assistance as well. So trust your own instinct, trust what the data is telling you, but then also bring in some other people who can help you identify those things. Okay. So first of all, you got to, identify that tipping point. What is it that's going to get us over the top? For us, it was, again, we have a 5-week session. We knew as an institution, I'd heard, somewhere in my brain, somebody indicated that the data indicated that if a student gets through the end of session 3 successfully, if they have a passing grade at the end of session 3 or unit 3, then they're more likely to pass the class, which is not too surprising. But as we're going to discover, getting to unit 3 was part of our problem. So, and identifying that tipping point was important for our overall effort to be able to say, this is really, where students are they're teetering on the edge, and we got to get them over this particular hill to get them on the other side, and then they're going to be much more likely to succeed. Okay. So in identifying the tipping point, I dove into the data. I also relied on my own experience and intuition, and then I really leaned heavily on my colleagues who were wonderful during that whole time. So, okay, once we've identified, okay, this is what we need to get students over this hump, this particular hill, right? We need to get them on the other side of this. This is our tipping point. So what is it that's keeping them from that, though? What are the obstacles that are there that are keeping them from getting to and over that tipping point? Right? So the second thing we had to do is identify some obstacles, identify what is it that's keeping the students from achieving that. So the first thing we had to do is find the pain points, right? Which is kind of a new buzzword. I know pain points, but I think it's appropriate here. What are the pain points? You got to find the pain points. What is it that are keeping students from achieving or keeping anybody from achieving and getting to that tipping point and then over the tipping point, right? For us, again, not with specific data, but I can tell you this is in general, these are our student engagement numbers for the different units that we have. So again, 5-week session, 5 units, 1 unit per week. But as you can see, we see a significant, we were at that time seeing a significant drop off from unit 1 to unit 2, unit 1 to unit 2. And there were a variety of reasons for that. Well, part of it was just, again, we had students who were earlier in their course track, and so they were newer, and so they were just we were getting a lot of flaky students that were coming in unit 1 and then disappearing. But we decided that's not really on the student, though. Part of that is on us. Part of that is we're not doing a very good job of engaging students right away. We identified that as an issue for our cohort. We had gone from working with students who were a little further on in their course track, and so we're a little more established and didn't really need didn't need as much encouragement, didn't need as much, kind of holding their hands to keep them in. They were kind of doing that on their own by that point. But now we were earlier in the course track, so we were seeing students who did need us to really hang on to them and pull them in and help them feel welcome. And we weren't doing a very good job of that, even from the start in after unit 1. The other thing is in unit 1. So again, going back to discussion boards, and we do have other assignments, but the discussion board is the one that I focused on a lot. The discussion board for Unit 1 is really straightforward. It's just an introduction. Just tell us about yourself. Tell us what you're doing here. Really super simple, right? I mean, there's, what topic do people know more about than themselves? So that discussion board is not very intimidating. Then in Unit 2, we're asking them to discuss, content related things. And we're asking them to kind of identify, communication issues in a situation and talk about this. And so we're really asking them to step out on a limb there and put themselves out there, because what if they're wrong? I mean, we've explained to students, it's hard to be wrong, and as long as you're answering the question, but they don't think that way, right? They think, I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to look foolish in front of others. So this was the first discussion board where we're asking them to kind of go out on a limb and talk about these things and stretch themselves, challenge themselves a little bit. And it was no surprise to us then after we thought about that we weren't seeing as many students. So that's why, again, we identified not only unit 2 as an important assignment. If we can get students comfortable enough to participate in that discussion board, we discovered that was a really critical tipping point for us, is getting them to engage in that unit 2 discussion board. But not only that, if we can get them to do it on time. Which for us, again, we have kind of a different schedule. Our unit weeks begin on Tuesday. These discussion boards are due on Thursday. So, but if we can get them to submit their discussion board by Thursday, an on-time submission of that Unit 2 discussion board, then we've really got a hook in them. We've really got them engaged in a much more meaningful way, and it's an expression of confidence from that student in their knowledge of the content, but also in their comfort level with their instructor and with the other students and things. So that for us became just a really critical tipping point. That again, that not only the Unit 2 discussion board, but on-time submission of that Unit 2 discussion board. But as you can see, I mean, a pain point for us was we're losing tons of students who participated in Unit 1, were engaged in Unit 1, and then we lost them for Unit 2. And then we see some slight decline after that, but that was, as you can see, the big gap. Yeah. So that was our pain point. So we were able to identify that student drop off of engagement from Unit 1 to Unit 2. Then we have to develop strategies. Once we identify that obstacle, then we have to figure out, okay, what do we do about it? Right? That makes sense. We know kind of that there's an issue here. By the way, this is not the only one that we identified. I mean, there are, pain points, plural. So we identified more than one, but that was just one example of one. But so for any pain point that you identify, then you have to develop a strategy for how do you overcome that. So one of the things we did as I laid this out for our faculty and as we discussed it was, I'm somebody who works backwards. Some people would say I am backwards. That's fair enough, but I work backwards a lot of times. So again, my thought was, okay, our goal is to get our goal is to get students to graduate, right? So how do we do that? We get them moving, continuing on in their classes, right? Which means if our goal is student persistence on through into other classes and through the end of their degree program, then we need them to have a passing grade at the end of this course. Right? So working backwards, that was our goal, to get them to the end of the course. So to do that, again, we identified as an institution that getting them to the end of Unit 3 with a passing grade is an important part of that. But as I just showed you, we weren't even getting students to Unit 2. If they're not getting to Unit 2, then they're not going to get to Unit 3 with a passing grade. Right? So again, thinking backwards and developing strategies around these things. So our issue, as we discovered, was, okay, what can we do to get students just into Unit 2? I mean, very early on in the class, what can we do to move students more effectively from Unit 1 to Unit 2? And in doing so, then hopefully set that chain in motion, that chain of events in motion. If we can get them to Unit 2, then we're on the way to getting them to the end of Unit 3 with a passing grade, which will then hopefully lead to them getting a passing grade at the end of the course and so forth, and setting them up for success in future classes and ongoing persistence in their degree program. So so that's the strategy we kind of developed. It was we wanted to work backwards, and so from that we identified again that Unit 1 to Unit 2 transition. And for us, one of the big things, as I mentioned, it was engagement. We were not doing a very good job of engagement. So then once we identified as a strategy, okay, we got to move students from Unit 1 to Unit 2. We identified some specific ways that we can do that, strategies we could use to do that. So one of them was being prepared before the beginning of the class even started. Right? Students have access to our classes a couple of days before the session begins. And so we've made it a priority to say, okay, our classes will be fully set up and ready to go and have this critical information before students have access to it. Not before the class starts a couple of days later, but before students have access, because as soon as they get in the class, we want them to see that we are prepared and have the confidence. If they can have confidence that their instructor is prepared, then that will help them have confidence in the class. But if they get in there and they see their instructor scrambling to throw things together 10 minutes before the start of the session, then what's that going to do to their confidence in the effectiveness of the course and so anyway, so we decided that preparedness, we've really emphasized, okay, you've got to have everything set up by this date. And so we do a lot of checks, and we have checklists and things to make sure that faculty are prepared for the start of the session from that opening bell, so to speak, when the students have access. Another one we talked about a lot is being human. And emphasizing that it's hard to do sometimes in an online class. It can seem like there's really just this kind of, especially in the age of AI, right, that there's not really a real person on the other side of things. So we emphasize when we're communicating with students, when we're talking to them we have synchronous live chats as part of our classes, but we also use a lot of outreach messages, you can see, and in our discussion board, we wanted to be human. And by that, we mean establishing a personal connection with them. So it doesn't mean that I have to give students my, bank information and social security number and things, but I can let them know that I'm human. So when I send an outreach message, students, a lot of times I'll say something, I'll just make a connection like, hey, it's getting to be springtime here, so it's going to be time for me to start mowing the lawn before long, because that's something students can connect with a lot of times, right? Or something, those types of things that, oh, wow, you have to mow the lawn too? Me too. And so you must be a part. I just think about, when I was in elementary school, I was always just so amazed when I would run into my teachers at the store, and I would always say like, "What are you doing here?" And because it never dawned on me that they didn't live at the school, that they might need groceries and they might need paper towel and things. I was always just so amazed that they were an actual person who had those kind of needs. So we've emphasized really trying to be human. And again, not being overly personal. That's not what we're talking about. I'm not sharing all kinds of really in-depth personal information, but just establishing that human connection. Yep, I've got to mow the lawn. I've got to rake the leaves. I've got to do these things because I'm a person too. And I have bad days and good days and things. So just being human. We've emphasized as well, just to really stress engagement in those early parts, outreach messages. As part of our institutional expectations, we message every student in our class every week with a personalized message through our internal messaging system. Right? And so we really honed in on those outreach messages and not just making them about like, hey, you didn't turn this in or whatever, but again, the tone of those messages and being human in those messages and so forth, and just really establishing that connection and trying to what we call anchor the students to the course and to the university and help them remain connected. And then our discussion board activity. I hate to keep pounding on discussion boards, but it's a really important aspect of our class and establishing that connection and engaging with students. We really stress, personalized responses and engagement in the discussion board activity. We stress multiple days of the week, so that students don't just get the impression you're in that class one day a week. But we want instructors to respond in multiple days throughout the week and have these personal connections in these, and so we develop strategies to help them do those things though, right? We didn't just throw it out there and say like, hey, you need to have better discussion board activity or you need to do better with your outreach messages. I've worked a lot over the last few years in developing tools to help them not only understand our expectations and what we want there, but to help them do these things better, right? To help them do them more effectively and more efficiently, and because we want to respect their time. Things so we've worked hard at these things and developing specific strategies. Now, this is again, all of this is just to get students from Unit 1 to Unit 2. We've put a lot of time and energy into this because we identified that as a tipping point, as an important part of getting students successfully through our classes. And so once we then identified what the pain points were from keeping them from doing that, we developed strategies around and specific strategies, detailed strategies around helping them overcome those pain points, right? And then to get back to data, despite it not being my favorite thing in the world, we needed to establish metrics and benchmarks for these things and really track it through the data and follow it through the data. I have a very like expansive, really boring spreadsheet, which is fantastic. It's that where I track all this data every week. We track all of us do it a little differently, but we all track different things about assignment submission and engagement and all kinds of things. So we track it quantitatively, and I'm also popping in and out of classes and making sure other people our faculty are meeting these expectations. But we need to establish metrics. So just real quickly, for example, again, these were the kind of the strategies that we developed, or that the goals that we had as we move through this plan. So for example, moving students from Unit 1 to Unit 2, again, I've mentioned several times now, we really emphasize that on-time submissions for the Unit 2 discussion board. So I look every week at, how are we doing on those on-time submissions and then overall submissions for discussion boards as well. But really, I mean, specifically identifying a specific metric and benchmark. And again, I can tell you basically there's a very strong connection between the number that we see in the Unit 2. I mean, if we have a low number in that on-time submissions in the Unit 2 discussion board, then I get concerned about our completion percentages because there's almost always a strong correlation between those two. It's you can almost predict with some pretty good accuracy what it's going to be based on that. So, but we have a metric for that particular goal. We have a metric again, as I showed you for course completion. I showed you kind of where the university wanted us to be and where I want us to be and what my dream goal is. And so we track that very carefully as well and try and identify, okay, if it's lower, what happened there? What do we need? And if it's higher, then what do we do well? And how can we really leverage that and maximize it? So we look at, course completion as a metric that we use a lot. And then we also track persistence, which for us means our students, after they leave our class, are they continuing on with their enrollment in the university and things, and we're looking at students even after they're out of our class for a certain period, right? Because we, again, the goal is graduation, and so we want them continuing on. So if they're not, like, part of our job, especially where we're at in the course track for many of these students, is helping them develop the confidence to be successful students. Right? Not just the competence within our own class, but the confidence that they need to be successful in higher education and in college in general. So, for us, that's a very important number. Are we doing that? Are we not only teaching them the skills they need in terms of interpersonal communication, but are we helping them develop the confidence and the skills that they need to continue to be successful after they're out of our class and throughout their journey at CTU? So we track course persistence. We have metrics that we look at. And again, when these things are higher or lower by a certain degree, then that's a sign for me to say, okay, what do we need to improve here? Or conversely, again, if it's really good, how can we leverage that? What went well here, and what can we do? What can we learn from that? Still constantly learning from this. So, okay. So we identify our tipping point. We identified then our obstacles, and through that, the pain points and the strategies and the metrics that we needed to be able to follow that, and use that information to help students again push through that and get over that tipping point. So then, what do we do specifically? I've mentioned a couple of things that we did in terms of engagement, but what do we do? And what do I look at as far as taking action? Again, as far as suggesting things for you. First of all, I would encourage you to focus on one or two things at a time, one or two obstacles at a time. We just talked about, identifying those obstacles, and there were a bunch for us, as there are for everything. There are always things you can do better, right? But we really we made a list of them, and I have that list still. And there's some we haven't even gotten to, but we decided really, now this is hard for me. I try and do everything all at once, and that's not a problem. And that's not a good way to go. Everything, everywhere, all at once is a great concept for a movie, right? But it's not such a great philosophy for how to take action and be successful in these things. I really encourage you to focus on, really specifically, focus on one or two things at a time and do those things really well, and then come back and do the next thing, do the next one or two things, and do that. So, again, for us, just real briefly, I've talked about this some, but um, our goal, our tipping point, one of the tipping points that we identified very early on was Unit 2 discussion board on-time submissions. And if you're not tired of me hearing that, or not tired of me saying that yet, then you haven't been listening very closely, I don't think. But um, the Unit 2 on-time submissions for the discussion boards. So again, as I've mentioned before, what is it that fed into that? What is the fed into that? I was completing our course setup on time, having things ready to go when students walked in. It was having assignment clarity. By that I mean, again, students were oftentimes intimidated by that Unit 2 discussion board because it asks them to put themselves out there a little bit. So helping them understand that. Again, we have synchronous, what we call live chats every week. So we have an hour over Zoom where students can come live. It's not mandatory, but they can come live. And then we also, I record mine and students can watch it later if they're not able to make it live. But I spend a lot of time in those live chats just talking about the discussion board assignments, just to make sure everybody's comfortable with it. It's not a lecture time for me. I always have more prepared than I need. And so maybe at the end of the time, I'll spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about a concept or doing, some quote unquote lecturing or whatever. But I'll tell you the beginning part of that time, I spend probably 15 minutes just connecting with students. Again, that engagement is so important for us. I always have what I call a question of the day, and it's always something silly, some stupid national art, and it's some stupid holiday. Again, my CTU colleagues will know that I love weird holidays. So like yesterday for my live chat, it was National Zoo Lovers Day. So we talked about that. We talked about zoos, and then the question of the day was, "What's your favorite animal?" And nothing to do with the class at all. Just a way to get people engaged and talking and things. So I'll spend 15 minutes on that, and I don't see it as a waste of time at all, and not in the least. If it's anchoring students to our class, then that's the goal there, right? And so, but I'll spend another, it's not uncommon for me to spend 15 or 20 minutes of this hour talking about that discussion board assignment. Excuse me, and walking students through, giving them a chance to share their ideas. And we workshop ideas. Yesterday, a student, we had the discussion board for this week up on the assignment up on the screen. And so we walked through the assignment, what she thought, what was the conversation she was going to use? It was about nonverbal communication. And so then we talked about, okay, so how did nonverbal communication affect that conversation? And we talked about that in detail. So basically, at the end of it, she just said, I said, okay, if you type that up, your discussion board's good to go. You can submit, that's your assignment. And so I'll do that with any student who wants to. If they want to workshop ideas or just share ideas, and if not, then I'll share my discussion board because I always post a sample discussion board there. And that's something we all do as well. So I'll talk about mine just to give some ideas and just to knock some things loose for them. But we want them to be comfortable with that assignment. So that was important for us in increasing this on-time discussion, on-time submissions, is that students are comfortable with that assignment. They really understand it then, hopefully, and are more comfortable doing so. It's not as intimidating, maybe. So I would do that. I've already talked about our faculty discussion board activity, how we want it to be engaging and connected specifically to that student and not just copy and paste. Yeah, good job, good point, whatever. No, we want them talking about that and sharing lessons and using that as a teaching opportunity and having it across multiple days of the week and those types of things. Student outreach, again, we have expectations that the faculty will connect with at least one message each week to every student in the class, even if they're not active in the class, even if they haven't submitted an assignment in 3 weeks, they're going to get a message that week, a personalized, individualized message from that faculty member. And so then it was a matter of not only, okay, so not just we have to do this, but how can we do this well? Well, how can we really make this effective and impactful? So we've talked a lot about things like being human, and I've provided resources and videos and things on how we can do this, effectively and efficiently. So we've really emphasized these things and kind of, put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, right, in terms of supporting faculty through that. But my point is, I mean, I spent probably a year on this, just following up on all these things, little bits at a time, not all at once, but little bits at a time, just focused on Unit 2 on-time discussion board submissions. I'm sure my faculty were sick of hearing about it, but they can also see the results, right? And just like I showed you, they could see the results. And we'll point out that, I mean, this is hundreds more students every year that are successfully completing this course and moving on toward their college degree. Our persistence is up, so we're impacting hundreds of lives every year, maybe more than 1,000 lives every year that we're increasing the over what we were getting before. Right. So it's not just hundreds. We have hundreds and hundreds of students every session. Every 5 weeks, we get, 1,400 students in this class. But it's now we're getting hundreds more students every year who are successfully moving on in their class than were before. That's really exciting. And so that makes it, again, worth it for us to have spent so much time on this and gotten so detailed with this. Um, another thing I want to share with you is working within your means. Um, Good teachers are often caught between, what they wish they could do, right? What we wish we could do, and what we actually have the means to do. What can we actually realistically get done? And so sometimes the reality doesn't line up with our dreams. And so while we should constantly work to expand what is possible, that should be our goal, is to really push the limits and expand what's possible and expand those resources. But we also have to be realistic about what is available to us in that moment, and available to the others on our team in that moment, and what we can expect from them and ask from them. And then we have to try and get the most out of that we can within those means. Okay, so we really have to work within our means then, and so understanding what our means are and then working within those means is important. So in addition to the financial and budgetary constraints, which are always, there for any organization, that's just a part of the reality. But in addition to those things, what I mean by working within your means is considering things like time. Time is not an infinite resource, as we all know. It's not for us, and it's not for faculty working with us, or anybody else on our team, that our colleagues and the people who work above us and below us and anywhere else. We all have a limited amount of time, which is, again, what I've emphasized over this time. My part of my job is developing resources to help our faculty do those things that we ask them to do more effectively and more efficiently, though. We've talked a lot about messaging strategies and how can we, we have, 35 to 37 students in a section. And so again, we're messaging each of those students every week with a personalized message. So how can we do that in an effective but yet efficient manner? We can't spend, 6 days with these messages because they also have grading and they have teaching and they have, and this is not for, any of them except for me. This is not their full-time job. They're adjunct faculty, right? So how can we manage, how can we respect their time as an institution? How can we respect their time and help them work within the means of their time and help them achieve what we're asking them, but while also respecting the limitations of that particular resource, right? So things like time, things like technology, technology has become super critical, especially in online education, obviously. What are people's comfort level, and what is their skill set and their talents around technology, and what technology do they have access to? Both our faculty and our students and everybody else who have to work within the means that we have available to us. And then the skills and talents of ourselves and the people that we work with. Again, I'm really fortunate to work with an amazing gen ed team, and so I don't have talents in every area. I have some in some areas, right? And people contact me sometimes and ask about different things. I do some work with the video and things like that. So people sometimes contact me with technical questions about that. And I'm happy to participate because I need their help in other areas. I need their help with other things that I'm not as good at, right? And again, I've never had anybody on our team even hesitate to say yes, which is incredible. So how can we both, leverage those things, use those skills and those talents and pool those things, but also work within the means of, okay, these people also have other things that they're doing. Working with me is not their full-time job, or, doing what I need them to do is not their full-time job at all. They're doing this out of the kindness of their heart. So we need to respect not only, what their talents and their skills are, and ask what we're asking them to do, but also their time and ourselves, though. Right. So we need to think about these things, how we can work within those means to achieve what we need to do. Again, I'll tell you, I leaned heavily into my own strengths during this entire process, but and also those of the strengths of my faculty team, the 40 instructors that we have, the communication instructors we have, as well as my colleagues at CTU, to develop different resources and tools and strategies that went into the project in-house that we created, and that may have cost nothing other than some time and energy, which is not, free, but still is not financial. So anyway, so we try to work within our means and utilize everything that we had available to us. And it's also important to work with your means because if you fly much, and you're actually paying attention to the instructions during that the pre-flight spiel that they give, then you are no doubt familiar with the instruction to put on your own oxygen mask before you put it on anyone else, right? Because you're not going to be any use to anyone else if you pass out before you get to the others, before you help them, right? So, and the same thing is true here. You can't you can't help nearly as much. You can't get nearly as much done. You can't be of use to other people and service to other people if you overextend your capital in those areas. And by that I mean, not just spending too much, and if you have a budget, overspending and things like that, but also, again, as amazing as our team is, and again, nobody has ever even hesitated to say yes to anything I've asked of them. But if I put too much on them, that's not fair. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to what we're trying to achieve. So we've got to understand that and work within our means, be keenly aware of the limits that we have, and okay. Last point, last thing I want to share with you is we got to get buy-in from your team, from our team. Right? Any team we're working with, we got to get buy-in from them. I worked for years as a camp counselor for many, many summers. And as you can imagine, canoeing was always a very popular activity with campers. Right? And I can tell you from extensive experience, especially with younger campers, that there are a few things that's frustrating in life, as struggling mightily to get halfway, just halfway across this lake, being exhausted because you've been working so hard to get halfway across this lake, and then you realize that the entire time you and your shipmate have been paddling in different directions. Right, have been they're paddling different on the wrong side, or so you're going in circles, or they're paddling whatever. And so I learned very early on. Yet, first of all, it's a good idea for me to be in back so I can see what they're doing, but Yeah, so that we can get go in the same direction. We can get paddling in the same direction, pulling in the same direction, whatever analogy you want to use. But you got to get buy-in from your team to do that. So it's pretty rare for these kind of efforts. If you're looking at tipping points and trying to overcome these obstacles, it's rare for these kind of efforts to be a solo project. Odds are that there are people working with you or for you or above you or some combination of all of those things. And you absolutely need everyone paddling in the same direction to be successful. If you're going to be successful, you've got to have everyone moving in the same directions. It's critical that everyone understand the mission of the project and how that fits into the vision and the values of your institution and the program and how that all fits together. We've got to clearly articulate that. You should also be able to clearly articulate how the benefits will outweigh the costs, and maybe even explain the ways that it will serve the students and really ideally themselves. If you can get, find a way to make it so that works well for them and helps them, that's great too, right? But ideally for themselves as well. So, but getting buy-in from your team is critically important if you're going to be able to take action in the most effective way. So, anyway, uh, I don't even think I have a final slide, but mostly I just wanted to again express some of these things that I've learned over the last couple of years. We've hit that tipping point and been able to get over it, as you can see, and sustain that success through the work of and efforts of a lot of people and a lot of work, and so I just want to share some of those thoughts with you on how we were able to get it done, and hopefully how some of that will translate for you as you're working on that. Okay, so. That's what I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions or discuss this at all. I don't know if anybody has any questions or anything they want to discuss or ask about or anything. I know we're pretty close to time, if not at time, so I don't want to get here. But um, but is there anything I can share at all with anybody? No? Okay. Quiet group. All right. I'm gonna put my email in the chat just in case anybody has any questions you come up with um, after this. You're welcome to contact me. I'm a slow typer, sorry. Let me check, make sure, because I'm also a bad typer. Yeah, it's just jrockey at coloradotech.edu. Be happy to be of any assistance that I can and discuss how what worked for us and how it might work for all of you. If I can be of assistance. But thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today.